All right, so are you ready to like really dive deep into Shane Parrish's clear thinking?
I am. It's not your typical self-help book.
No, no, no.
It's more like, almost like a user manual for your brain,
Yeah.
figuring out how we can kind of trip ourselves up mentally with these habits we don't even realize we have.
Yeah, those sneaky mental habits that we're not even aware of.
Exactly, and then how to outsmart them and
Exactly.
make decisions that actually help us get to where we want to be.
Right, instead of holding us back.
Totally.
Well, one of the things that I found so fascinating about this book was how Parrish uses real-life examples to illustrate these mental patterns.
Yeah,
It's not just theory, it's like, oh, I can totally see how that plays out
I know,
in my everyday life.
for sure.
So one of the key concepts he talks about is these things called defaults.
Defaults, yeah.
And these are basically our brain's kind of autopilot
You're
reactions,
right, like our go-to
our
moves.
go-to moves. And he breaks them down into four main types:
Okay.
emotion, ego, social, and inertia.
So it's like having these default settings for how we think and react to things?
Exactly. And they can be super helpful because they make our brains more efficient.
Right.
But they can also really lead us astray if we're not careful.
Yes.
So let's kind of break down each of these defaults, starting with the emotion default.
Okay.
We've all been there, right?
Uh-huh.
Someone says something, it just rubs us the wrong way, and we just react
Yeah. Yeah.
without even thinking.
I mean, we're human.
We are.
We have emotions.
Yeah, Parrish uses the example of having a coworker who's passive-aggressive,
Oh, yeah.
you know? And instead of just calmly addressing the situation, we let our emotions kind of hijack our thinking. And we end up maybe saying something we regret or doing something we regret.
Totally. It's like we hit the gas pedal when we should have been hitting the brakes.
Yeah.
Like just a knee-jerk reaction instead of pausing and like really thinking about it.
And you know, speaking of getting carried away, the next default is the ego default.
Oh, the ego.
We all want to be right.
Of course.
But sometimes our need to protect our ego, can prevent us from learning, growing, and really even seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And Parrish uses a pretty extreme example here. He talks about Benedict Arnold.
Oh, wow.
You know, his ego was so bruised, he felt like he wasn't getting the recognition he deserved, that he ended up betraying his country.
Yeah. Talk about letting your ego drive the car right off a cliff.
Right off a cliff.
Like it's a reminder that sometimes we can be so focused on being right that we lose sight of what really matters.
Totally. And then we have the social default.
Social default.
And this is all about kind of getting caught up in following the crowd, even when it's not the best course of action.
It's like that pressure to conform.
Yes, to fit in.
Yeah.
Parrish uses this great analogy of ditch diggers.
Hmm.
They're all diligently digging away, but only the one who kind of stops and thinks differently and invents the shovel actually changes the game.
It's like the innovator who's not afraid to stand out from the crowd.
Exactly, and that makes you think, right?
Mm.
How many times have we maybe held back a brilliant idea or a different opinion because we didn't want to rock the boat?
Totally. Or maybe we just didn't even realize there was another way to do things.
Right, and finally we have the inertia default.
Inertia. So that's all about staying stuck in our ways.
Yeah, it's that resistance to change.
Even when things aren't working.
Right, even when it's not working.
Yeah.
And Parrish has this great analogy in the book of this company that keeps fixing a server that crashes every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
They spend all this time and money on temporary fixes, but they never actually address the root cause.
It's like they're just putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem.
Right. So we've got these four defaults: emotion, ego, social, and inertia. These are our brain's autopilot reactions, and they can sometimes, steer us off course.
Yeah.
But the good news is that we can actually do something about it.
Right. We can take control.
We can take control, and that's what we're going to explore next.
Perfect.
So stay tuned as we dive into some really practical strategies for overcoming these defaults and making more conscious, deliberate decisions.
I'm excited.
Me too.
So we've talked about those mental defaults, those kind of autopilot reactions our brains have.
Yeah, the ones that can really trip us up if we're not paying attention.
Exactly. But the good news is we can actually learn to override those defaults and make more conscious decisions.
Okay, so how do we do that? Where do we even start?
Well, Parrish really stresses the importance of clearly defining the problem before jumping into solutions.
That seems pretty obvious though, right? Doesn't everyone do that?
You'd think so, but honestly, it's easy to get caught up in, wanting to be the hero.
Oh yeah, the one who swoops in with the solution.
Exactly. And there's, often a social pressure to just appear decisive and, take action quickly.
Yeah, just do something. Anything.
Right. But Parrish points out that that can backfire big time.
So how do we make sure we're actually solving the right problem? That we're not just putting a Band-Aid on something that needs more attention?
He suggests asking this really powerful question: what would have to be true for this problem not to exist in the first place?
Hmm, I like that. It forces you to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture,
Exactly. You're getting at the root cause, not just the symptoms.
like those overflowing animal shelters. They can keep hosting adoption events, but until they address the underlying issues like spaying and neutering programs, maybe affordable pet care, the problem's just going to keep coming back.
Exactly. It's about being really clear about what you're actually trying to solve before you even start brainstorming solutions.
So once we've done that, we've got a good grasp on the problem. What's next?
Well, then Parrish introduces this concept called second-level thinking.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I totally get it. What does it mean to think on a second level?
So imagine you're thinking about investing in a hot new stock, right? It's been performing really well. Everybody seems to be making money. First-level thinking would be, jump in. I got to get in on this action.
Right, don't miss out on the gold rush.
Exactly. But second-level thinking says, okay, but what happens next? What if interest rates go up? Or a competitor emerges? What if the market takes a downturn?
So it's not just about the immediate, obvious consequences. It's about thinking about the ripple effects down the line.
Exactly. It's about taking a longer-term perspective, anticipating potential challenges, and having a plan for different scenarios.
Basically, it's like thinking about the consequences of the consequences.
Right, because things are rarely as straightforward as they seem on the surface.
Totally. And to make those really informed decisions, we also need to avoid another common pitfall: binary thinking.
Ah, yes, that black and white thinking, right.
Exactly. It's that should I stay in this job or quit kind of thinking when there might be, other options like negotiating a new role or looking for different opportunities within the same company or maybe taking some time to develop some new skills.
Right, it's that tendency to limit ourselves to just two choices when there might be a whole spectrum of possibilities.
Parrish uses a great example of choosing between a Tesla and a BMW.
Yeah.
You might get caught up in those obvious things: price, features, but what about resale value, maintenance costs, even the ethics of the
It's
companies?
like expanding your field of vision,
Oh,
right? Looking beyond those initial two options to see what else is out there.
and once we've expanded those options, then what?
Well, then it's really important to establish clear criteria for actually making the decision.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Parrish says your criteria should be relevant to the decision, specific, and decisive.
So what would that look like in a real-world scenario?
Okay, say you're deciding between two job offers. Your criteria might include things like salary, benefits, company culture, growth opportunities, work-life balance. But you got to define what each of those actually means to you.
So for example, instead of just good company culture, I might say, I want a collaborative environment where people feel comfortable sharing ideas and taking risks.
Exactly. The more specific you are with your criteria, the easier it will be to evaluate your options.
And this kind of reminds me of the Challenger disaster. It was a tragic example of how using the wrong criteria, in that case, focusing on deadlines and external pressures rather than safety, can have devastating consequences.
Yeah, that's a sobering reminder that our decision-making criteria should align with our values, not just short-term goals or outside pressures.
So, okay, we've defined the problem, we've thought about those long-term consequences, we've expanded our options, and we've set our criteria. What's next?
Now it's time to gather information. But Parrish points out that not all information is created equal.
Okay, so how do we know what information to trust? What to pay attention to?
He introduces these two really useful concepts:
Yeah.
hi-fi information and high-X information.
Okay, break those down for me. What are they and why are they important for making good decisions?
Well, hi-fi information is basically high-fidelity information.
But
It's like listening to a music recording with really clear audio.
got it. So no distortion or interference.
Exactly. You want the purest signal possible.
Okay, so it's about getting information that's as close to the source as possible.
Yes, unfiltered by bias or interpretation.
So like instead of just reading a news article about a political event, I should try to find like firsthand accounts from people who were actually there.
That's a great example. Parrish tells this story about General George Marshall,
Oh, yeah.
who was trying to figure out why pilots were refusing to fly during World War II.
Okay.
And instead of just relying on reports or rumors,
Yeah.
He went straight to the source, talked to the pilots themselves,
Huh.
and discovered that they weren't actually worried about the planes.
Really?
They were worried about the lack of mosquito nets for the ground crews.
Wow.
Who were getting sick with malaria.
Oh, so it was a health concern, not a safety concern with the planes themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he never would have figured that out if he hadn't gone straight to the source.
That's such a good reminder to go beyond those secondhand accounts and really try to get the full picture.
Right. And then there's high-X information,
Okay, Hayek's.
which stands for high expertise information.
Okay.
And this is all about tapping into the knowledge of experts in relevant fields.
So instead of just Googling a problem, I might consult with a specialist who's been dealing with that issue for years.
Precisely. Parrish shares his own experience learning to code at an intelligence agency.
Interesting.
He was surrounded by brilliant people,
Yeah.
but he quickly realized that even the smartest generalist can benefit from the guidance of a true expert in a particular domain.
It's like I can read all the books and articles I want about investing, but nothing beats getting advice from a seasoned financial advisor.
Absolutely. And when you are seeking out expert advice, ask good questions.
Hmm.
Okay, so what kinds of questions should we be asking?
Don't just ask, what should I do?
Yeah.
Instead, try asking things like, how do you think about this problem? Or what are the key variables to consider?
So it's more about learning their thought process, their framework for approaching the problem, rather than just getting a quick fix or solution.
Exactly. It's about developing your own decision-making skills by learning from the best.
Okay, so we've gathered all this great hi-fi and high-X information.
Right.
We've defined the problem, we've set our criteria, we've thought about all the angles.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we know when it's actually time to make a decision? When do we stop gathering information and actually take action?
That's a crucial question. And Parrish argues that different decisions require different approaches.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we know which approach to take? Is there like a rule of thumb we can use?
He offers this really helpful principle called stop FLOP no.
Stop F-lock, no. Okay, I like it already. What does F-lock stand for?
It stands for first, lose an opportunity. Basically, sometimes waiting too long can actually cost you a valuable opportunity.
Right, like if I'm thinking about applying for my dream job, but I keep putting off sending in my application because I want to tweak my resume one more time.
Yeah.
Someone else might snag that opportunity before I even get my foot in the door.
Exactly. So sometimes it's better to just take action and risk making a few mistakes than to miss out altogether.
Makes sense. But of course, not all decisions are like that. Some are much bigger and have way higher stakes.
Right. And that's where the stop part of the principle comes in.
Okay.
It reminds us that there's a point where we just have enough information to make a reasonable decision. We don't want to get stuck in analysis paralysis, endlessly gathering data and second-guessing ourselves.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
It's like when you're trying to choose a restaurant for dinner. You can spend hours browsing menus and reading reviews online, but at some point, you just got to pick a place and go eat.
So true. Just make a decision and enjoy the meal. Okay, so we've got stop and FLP. What about the no part of the principle?
Ah, yes, no. This is about those moments when you just have that gut feeling, that flash of insight, where it suddenly becomes crystal clear what you need to do.
I love those moments.
Where-
Like, it's not just a random hunch. It's like this deep knowing that's based on all the information you've gathered and your understanding of the situation.
Exactly. It's when all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place and you just know with certainty what the right decision is.
That's awesome. So we've made our decision, hopefully, using Parrish's framework to guide us. What's next? Does he just leave us there?
Not at all. He goes beyond just the initial decision-making process and talks about the importance of reflecting on our decisions and learning from them. It's not just about making one good decision. It's about developing a mindset of clear thinking that we can apply to all areas of our lives.
I love it. So it's like a continuous process of learning and growth.
Exactly. And one of the key insights he offers is this concept of margin of safety.
Okay, margin of safety. What's that all about?
It's about building in a buffer to protect ourselves from unexpected circumstances. Like, imagine you're planning a road trip.
Okay.
You estimate it'll take about 8 hours to get to your destination. A margin of safety would be factoring in extra time for traffic, or detours, or rest stops. Instead of planning to arrive right on time, you give yourself an extra hour or two, just in case.
That's smart. It's like having a cushion to absorb the impact if things don't go exactly as planned. And I guess that applies to more than just road trips, right?
Absolutely. It applies to financial decisions, career choices, even relationships. It's about anticipating potential risks and creating a plan to mitigate those risks.
That makes a lot of sense. Parrish also talks about the idea of bullets before cannonballs, right?
Yes. It's about testing the waters with small experiments before making any big commitments.
I love that. It takes the pressure off of having to make a perfect decision right away.
Right. It's like dipping your toe in the pool before diving headfirst.
Exactly. So instead of like making a huge investment in a new business venture, I might start with a smaller pilot project to see how things go.
That's a great example. It allows you to gather information and adjust your course as needed.
Parrish shares a story about his friend Solomon, who is trying to hire a new CEO.
Oh, yes.
And instead of just offering the job to someone based on their resume and interview, he gave each candidate a small project to work on.
A bullet, so to speak.
Exactly. To see how they performed in a real-world scenario.
It's so much more effective than just relying on traditional hiring methods.
Yeah, it's like a trial run
Exactly. It gives
Yeah.
you a much better sense of someone's capabilities.
and reduces the risk of making a bad hire.
For sure. Now, another thing Parrish emphasizes is living with the decision before announcing it.
What does that mean exactly?
It's about taking some time to really let a decision sink in, to process it fully before sharing it with other people.
Okay.
It gives you a chance to catch potential problems or maybe refine your approach.
So it's like letting an idea marinate before serving it up to the world.
I love that analogy.
It gives you time to taste it, adjust the seasoning, make sure it's really what you want.
Exactly. And it's also about trusting your intuition. Sometimes we need a little time and space to let our subconscious mind process things.
Makes sense. Speaking of intuition, Parrish also talks about the importance of separating decisions from outcomes, right?
He does. He points out that sometimes a good decision can lead to a bad outcome,
Oh, yeah.
and vice versa.
True.
Sometimes luck plays a role. You can make the best possible decision based on the information you have, and things still might not go your way.
That's such a good point because
Yeah.
it's so easy to get caught up in judging ourselves based on the results of our decisions.
Yeah.
But there are so many factors outside of our control that can influence the outcome.
Parrish uses the example of Pete Carroll's controversial Super Bowl call, where he chose to pass the ball instead of running it.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. A lot of people thought that was a terrible call.
It seemed like a huge blunder.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at the data, the context of the situation, it was a statistically sound decision. The outcome just didn't go their way.
That's amazing. It's a good reminder that we should focus on the process more than the result.
Yes. Did we gather the right information? Did we define the problem clearly? Did we consider all the angles? If we made the best decision we could with the information we had at the time, then we can learn from the experience and move on without beating ourselves up.
It's about detaching our self-worth from the outcome.
Yes. And focusing on continuous improvement.
So after this deep dive into clear thinking, what's the biggest takeaway for you? What are folks going to walk away with today?
You know, for me, the biggest takeaway is that clear thinking is a skill. And like any skill, it can be cultivated. It's not something we're born with.
Right.
It's something we develop through practice and conscious effort.
Like learning to play a musical instrument.
Exactly. The more we practice, the better we get. And the more we apply these principles to our everyday lives, the better we become at making decisions that lead to the outcomes we desire.
Well said. And as Parrish says, the quality of our lives is directly related to the quality of our decisions.
So true.
So let's all make those decisions count. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling really inspired to take a closer look at my own decision-making processes.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to be using that STOP, FLOP, no principle
Yeah.
and thinking more about those bullets before cannonballs. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into clear thinking. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and happy decision-making.